What is inflation? Should inflation be high or low? What's good for the economy? Let's look at that in the next 5 minutes. Inflation is defined as the rise in price of goods and services within a certain period of time, and usually this period is measured annually. So it indicates how the prices go up within an economy. So is it good to have a higher inflation or a lower inflation, or what's the right level of inflation? To understand this, we need to understand that the balancing of two concepts of supply and demand. When supply is short but there is a huge demand, you find that the prices go up because the demand is going after lesser supply of either goods or services. So it pushes the price up and it pushes the inflation up. So when demand exceeds supply, you have an inflation growth, a positive inflation. Conversely, when supply exceeds demand and there are a lot of goods in the market but less demand, actually the prices drop because they need to attract the buyers. So what happens is the prices go down and inflation starts cooling down, and at some stage it may go to negative inflation. So you have then what is classically called as deflation. So you have inflation, which is positive growth of prices, and deflation where the prices go negatively. And both are, very simply speaking, dependent on the balance between supply and demand. So what's the right level which is good for the economy? One thing is sure, that the demand has to be more than the supply. That's when manufacturers or producers like farmers actually get a better price for what they produce. So the demand has to be always higher than the supply. The moment demand goes below the supply, you have a problem because deflation is a problem. It's a very big indicator of a stalling, faltering economy. Having said that, how much positive inflation is okay? Most banks believe and finance experts believe an inflation of about 2% is okay, which means that there is a demand which exceeds supply and causes a price increase of around 2% annually. To me, this percentage has to be looked in comparison with the growth. Let's take an example of last year. While India's inflation hovered between 4 to 5%, and the globe was about 6 to 8%, and of course some countries went up till 60, 70%. And we know why. There's a lot of issues, geopolitical issues like war, the crisis which it caused in the energy prices and things like that. But you need to look at inflation in comparison to the growth, the GDP growth. So when the US inflation is say about 4.5, 5 to 6% at one stage, which is pretty high, but the growth was only 2.5% or 2.3%. So in effect, their currency is now buying less for them. So if you have saved money, the value of the money has gone down. It will anyway go down when there is positive inflation, because when prices are going up year on year, what the money can buy is actually going down. The purchasing power of the money goes down. But when your growth is lower as a country than the inflation, then you are actually into very, very bad territory. India was probably one of the few countries which grew at about 6.5, 7% and had a sort of an average inflation about 4.5% last year. So we had a growth which far outstripped the inflation. So when I look at growth, look at inflation too, and because it will give you an idea whether it's real growth or not. So inflation is quite a complex topic, but I think if there is one takeaway from today's session, I think you should remember that this is clearly showing the link between supply and demand. So when demand is high and supply is lesser in comparison, your inflation will be positive. But if it gets too positive, that means you have got an artificially excessive demand. And this happens when you print money or pump money into the system, which is not normal in an economic cycle. You create artificial demand and brings up the prices. So we need an inflation which is sensible, which is balanced, and most banks and governments are using financial tools to control what they think is the right inflation level for their country and their economy to give it consistent growth and a lot of stability. Hope this helps. Till next time, stay unstoppable.